Every night I saw a faint light flicker in the abandoned house across the street. For years, nobody had lived there. The curtains were always drawn. The windows were always dusty. The door was always chained shut. But every night at exactly midnight, the upstairs light would turn on. I watched for 3 nights straight. On the 4th night, the light flickered and stayed on. I got closer to the window. That's when I saw it, a figure in the window, waving at me. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. How could anyone know I was watching? Was this person crazy? Did they live in the house? Was that why the curtains were always drawn, the windows covered, the door chained shut? I couldn't tell. I didn't want to get any closer. I didn't want to find out. I called the police. An hour later, a squad car pulled up outside the house and 2 officers walked up to the front door. One of them knocked. No answer. Of course not. I watched from my bedroom window across the street as the officers shone their flashlights through the dusty window and the cobwebbed doorway. I saw them walk through the rooms, check under the beds, look in the closets, even go upstairs. The one who had knocked came back downstairs and laughed at me. "You said there was a person living there," he said into his radio. "No sign of life here, just some old furniture and a few boxes of stuff. Must have been an animal or something that made the light come on. You sure you weren't seeing things?" He looked at me, then shook his head and walked back to his partner. "Let's go. This place is a write-off," he said, as they got into the squad car and drove away. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and went back to bed. But that's when my curtains fell open. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. How could this be? I had closed them last night. In fact, I never opened them during the day. I lived alone. I'd moved into this house over a year ago after my wife died. It was a big house with too many rooms, so I kept most of them locked. But I had never locked the curtains. They were always free to blow in the breeze whenever I wanted them to be. Except last night I had closed them. I knew I had. Then I noticed something else. My bedroom window, which was always open at night, letting in the warm summer air, was shut tight. So tight that the window latch, which I'd left indented, allowing it to catch the breeze, was now flush against the window frame. Then I saw it. On the windowsill, right where the morning sun would hit if the window was open, was a single white feather. I got out of bed and walked over to it, my bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. It was a beautiful feather, longer than my thumb and nearly as wide as my little finger. I'd never seen a feather like it before. It was unlike any feather I'd ever seen. And that's when I noticed the rocking chair in the corner of my bedroom. It was an old chair with a worn wooden frame and a faded floral pattern on the cushions. I'd found it in the attic months ago and brought it down to use as storage. I liked the idea of a rocking chair, but I'd never used it. It had always remained empty. Until today, that is. Because sitting in the chair was the girl from the house across the street. She was no longer waving. She wasn't even looking at me. She was staring straight ahead, her eyes blank, her face pale, her hair long and black, covering the white dress she wore, the one with the collar, the one I had seen in the abandoned house across the street. I took another step forward. My voice caught in my throat. What did she want? Why had she come to me? Was she here to harm me? I don't know. All I do know is that the next thing I remember is waking up on the floor with a white feather clutched in my hand and the rocking chair rocking gently back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. When people think of sound, they usually think of something pleasant, like the song of a bird or the laughter of friends. But sometimes sound can be more than just pleasant. It can be terrifying. This happened to me when I was camping with my friend Mark in a forest that swallowed sound. The night before, there had been a big storm, but when we woke up in the morning, the sky was clear, and the only cloud was a single white puff in the endless blue above us. But there was no bird song, no rustle of leaves in the wind, not even the buzz of insects. It was unnerving. But Mark just said it was the storm moving in, and suggested we hike to the lake and fish. I agreed, though I kept glancing over my shoulder at the silent trees as if expecting something to jump out at me. There was a narrow path that wound through the trees, and we soon left the last vestiges of civilization behind. That's when I noticed something odd. Our footsteps made no sound on the path. In fact, we couldn't hear anything at all. It was as if someone had pressed the mute button on the entire forest. I stopped and put my hands over my ears as if to catch some sound, anything, but heard nothing. Mark walked ahead and I called out to him, but my voice seemed to get lost in my throat. He turned around and began to walk back toward me, but as he did, the ground beneath his feet seemed to drink up the sound of his footsteps. I blinked, and he was gone. I called his name again, but my voice sounded faint and far away, as if I were shouting into a canyon. Then I heard it, a whisper coming from the trees. It wasn't a whisper in my ear, but all around me. And as I turned to face it, it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I don't want to be too dramatic, so I won't say that I was terrified, but I will say that I was scared enough to run. I turned and ran back the way we had come, my footsteps pounding on the path, and the forest gave them back to me in full volume. When I got home that night, I told my story to anyone who would listen, but they just laughed at me and told me that I was making things up for attention. But I know what I heard, even if no one else believes me. Sometime later, I was driving home from a trip to the city, and it was late. The storm had returned, and the rain was coming down in sheets. The wipers struggled to keep up, and the wind screamed past my ears. I had to turn the radio up to drown out the wind, and that's when I heard it. A whisper in the roar of the wind. "Turn back!" I slammed on the brakes and turned to look in the rearview mirror. There in the darkness behind me, I could have sworn I saw a shape in the swirling mists. A hunched figure with long, gnarled fingers that seemed to reach out to me from the darkness. But when I turned back to the road, it was gone. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, I told myself. Maybe I really was just making things up for attention. But then I heard the whisper again, this time closer. "Turn back, turn back." I threw the car into reverse and slowly backed up the road. As the mist swirled around me, I strained to see through it, but all I saw was the dark trees pressing in on either side of me. I hadn't gone very far when I hit bottom. First, I turned around and drove forward slowly, cautiously. And when I reached the spot where I had seen the figure, I stopped and got out. In the rain, I walked back to where I had seen the shape in the mist, but there was nothing there. Just a dark, empty forest. I never told anyone about that night, not even my best friends. And as the years passed, I tried to forget about it. But sometimes on stormy nights, when the wind is high and the rain is coming down in sheets, and when the trees are calling out to me in their endless whispers, I hear it. I hear the sound of Mark's voice, and he is calling to me from the trees. "Come back," he whispers. "Come back." Welcome to my channel. The bell above the door chimed merrily, announcing my arrival to the owner of the Quick Stop Motel. But when I pushed open the door, the chime was abruptly cut off by an evil laugh that echoed through the empty lobby. Startled, I called out, "Hello?" My voice bounced off the walls and returned no answer. The wind outside picked up, rattling the window in its frame. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and walked further into the lobby. The carpet was threadbare, and the floral wallpaper was peeling away from the damp concrete block beneath it. Cobwebs brushed against my face as I walked, and a single fly buzzed erratically around the room. The flickering neon sign outside cast long, distorted shadows that danced macabrely on the walls. I shivered. Just then, a key appeared behind the peeling paint of the counter. I turned to find a man standing there holding a bunch of keys on a ring. His eyes were wide and blank, like two black marbles. Without a word, he thrust the key ring at me and then shuffled away, disappearing into the musty darkness beyond. I followed him until he stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. He rattled his keys again and then, still without a word, unlocked the door and disappeared inside. I sighed and shook my head, wondering if the place had a vacancy sign or if this creepy old man was just trying to give me a tour of the most grungy motel room I'd ever seen. Then I heard the sound of crashing thunder and saw a flash of lightning momentarily illuminate the rain-streaked windows. I quickened my pace, eager to get to my room before the storm hit. As I reached for the door handle, the wind suddenly slammed against the building and the old glass pane shattered, sending shards flying everywhere. I jumped back, yanking my hand away just as another bolt of lightning illuminated the room, revealing a dusty four-poster bed draped with a tattered mosquito net, a vanity table with a cracked mirror, a wardrobe with the paint chipped and peeling away, a television set perched atop a rickety table, and a single cobweb-covered chair pulled up beside it. There was also a large, dark stain on the otherwise white sheets that looked disturbingly like blood. Then I heard it again, the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth just outside my door. I strained to listen. They were getting closer. Then I heard a low voice whispering my name. Paralyzed with fear, I couldn't move or make a sound. The footsteps stopped right outside the door, and the voice began to growl. Suddenly, the doorknob turned, and the door swung open. Breathless, I stared at the empty doorway. The storm had reached its peak, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. I threw back the covers and burrowed deep into the blankets, pulling the mosquito net around me like a cocoon. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself not to think about the sound of footsteps pacing the hall or the raspy whispers that seemed to slither under my skin. In the morning, after, of course, I'd had the most awful night's sleep of my life, I got up and went to the front desk to check out. But the clerk was nowhere to be seen. In fact, the whole place seemed abandoned. The counter was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. And as I pushed aside the cobwebs to see if there was a phone number or an address, something else caught my eye. Beneath the grime, I saw the outline of a name tag pinned to the counter. It simply read, Joe. I stepped closer and peered around the edges of the counter. On the other side, hidden in the gloom of what seemed to be an abandoned office, I saw a door. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked over to investigate. As I pushed the door open, I found an old photograph lying on the desk. I picked it up and brushed away the dust, revealing a smiling Joe with his wife and kids. It was a nice picture of a happy family, but what really caught my eye was the date written on the back in Joe's neat handwriting, 1974. Check out these crazy coincidences. I was going to make a joke about how every single person in the city was an idiot except me, because I'm the one who got the last seat on the night bus before they all decided to drive out of town and get stranded in the storm. I mean, come on. The weatherman said it was going to be a doozy, but no. They just had to go out and get drunk at the Blue Angel Tavern instead of staying in and watching TV like a normal person. I shook my head, chuckling to myself. Good riddance, I said. Then I turned to the driver and asked him what kind of an idiot drives a bus in this weather. He didn't answer. I guess he just took it personally. Fine, I thought, more room for me to stretch my legs. As we moved through the empty streets, I watched the other passengers take their seats. Some were laughing, some were crying, but most of them sat there silently with their heads lowered, their faces hidden. Well, I thought, maybe they know something I don't. Maybe there's more to this city than meets the eye. But when I looked back at the driver, I realized his face was wrong. It wasn't that he was badly dressed or anything like that. His face just seemed to be floating in front of him. It wasn't attached to anything. Then I saw the steering wheel turn by itself, and the bus suddenly veered into the oncoming lane. I gasped. But then I remembered what the old woman said before she died, how everything was my fault. She said I shouldn't have been born, I shouldn't have left the house, I shouldn't have talked to the stranger, I shouldn't have trusted the bridge, I shouldn't have followed the signs, I shouldn't have ridden the bus. So I pulled the cord to stop the bus, but it didn't stop. I pulled it again, harder this time, and screamed, "Stop the bus, please!" But the driver didn't look at me. He didn't even move. I pounded on the dashboard, but the bus kept moving forward. Then I saw the other passengers slumping in their seats, their faces melting away like wax. They weren't asleep. They were dead. I shouted, but the wind snatched the words from my mouth and scattered them across the street. The fog pressed against the windows, whispering, "Let me in! Let me in! Let me in!" I pressed my face against the glass, but it was too late. The world outside the window was gone. All I could see was swirling white. I screamed, but nobody heard me. The whispers grew louder. "Let me in! Let me in! Let me in!" Then the bus lurched to a sudden halt and the door hissed open. I stumbled out onto the street, coughing and gasping for breath. The wind tore at my clothes, but I didn't care. I was free. I ran as fast as I could, as far as I could, until I collapsed in a heap at the bus stop. Looking back, I saw the bus doors close. Then the driver smiled for the first time. He took off his coat, revealing the bloodied meat cleaver hidden beneath. Hello, friends. I'm here with a scary story. My little sister had an old teddy bear that looked like it had been through the wringer of an industrial washing machine. It was torn in many places, and the stuffing hung out of the rips like intestines. But she loved that bear. She slept with him every night, and we never allowed her to bring it into our room because the sound it made. Every night when my parents were asleep, I could hear faint wheezing sounds coming from the bear, sounds like breathing. I assumed the bear was somehow broken and was filling with air. And then, one night, I got fed up and decided to take care of the problem. It was late, and I had to sneak into my little sister's room and take the bear while she was sleeping. I crept into her room and stared down at the two of them. My sister was fast asleep, and the bear was slumped over in a way that suggested it wasn't actually breathing. I reached over and poked it in the ribs. My sister stirred but didn't wake up. I pulled the bear close and crept out of the room. I took the bear downstairs and hid in the living room with it on the floor. Then I took some scissors and began opening up the bear's stomach. I cut and tore until I had a big hole. Then I reached inside and started digging through the stuffing. I pulled out handful after handful of old, smelly stuffing. But there was nothing else. No air, no mechanism, just stuffing. I ripped the whole thing open, but the breathing continued. Then I heard it right next to my ear. I dropped the bear and it hit the floor. The breathing stopped for a moment and then started again. I turned around and stared at the bear. Its glass eyes seemed to glisten in the darkness. They were staring directly at me. I ran back upstairs to put the bear back in my sister's room. But when I got there, I realized I couldn't bring myself to do it. The breathing had been coming from inside the bear, but now it was coming from everywhere. I went back downstairs, and my mom was sitting in the living room watching TV. She hadn't heard anything, of course. No one ever believed me when I told them about the noise. I went back to my room and tried to sleep, but the breathing continued. I could hear it in the closet, under my bed, and sometimes right behind me. And then one day my little sister came into my room and asked where the bear was. I told her I had taken it apart because it was making a weird noise, but I had no idea where it was. She looked distraught. She crawled around on the floor looking for the remains of the bear, but we never found them. She eventually got over it and moved on to a new teddy bear. But the breathing continued. I could still hear it sometimes at night. I knew that if I told my mom what I had heard, she would think I was crazy and take away my console. So I kept it to myself for fear of losing my console. But I don't have the courage anymore. I'm going to tell my mom and see what she says. Maybe together we can find the source of the breathing. I hope it doesn't drive us crazy first. And that's my story. The first time I ever heard this story, I was sitting right here in my basement writing an essay for school, of course. My friend told me about this place that she and her friends found when they were students at our school. Apparently, there was a rumor going around that there was a secret classroom in the basement of our school. Now, being skeptics, my friend and her two other friends decided to find it one night after school. They went to the basement and found a door that was locked, nailed shut. But that didn't stop them. They pried it open. At the top of the long, winding stairwell was a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. illuminating swirls of dust motes dancing in the stale, stagnant air. At the bottom, however, it revealed a classroom. Desks were neatly arranged in rows, facing a blackboard. The clock on the wall read 3:24 p.m. Chalk was strewn across the board, and a few notebooks lay abandoned on the desks as if the students had just gotten up and left. It felt like a set from a horror movie, eerily silent and still. Then the bell rang. Footsteps could be heard in the hall above, but the school was empty. All of the students had gone home hours ago. They stood there listening, frozen in fear as the footsteps came closer and closer. The whispering started softly, then grew in volume. "Get out," it said. "Get out now." My friend and her friends froze, paralyzed with terror. They wanted to run, to scream, but they couldn't. They were glued to the spot, rooted to the floor. Then the whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "Why are you here? You shouldn't be here. Get out." Their eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the sound, but they saw nothing. The only movement was the swaying of the lone bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting elongated shadows that stretched and distorted on the far wall. After what felt like an eternity, the whispers faded away, leaving behind an oppressive silence that was somehow even more terrifying than the voices. My friend and her friends slowly began to move. Their legs felt weak and rubbery, their hearts pounding like drums in their chests. As they made their way out of the room, one of them noticed a notebook lying on one of the desks. It was open to a fresh page, the words "Class in Session" scrawled in neat handwriting. Below it, a sentence appeared as if by magic. "Sit down." Their blood ran cold. They didn't need to be told twice. They fled the classroom, the whispers echoing in their ears. Back in the safety of the stairwell, they dared not speak. They didn't want to attract attention, to become trapped there forever. They raced up the stairs, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the confined space. Finally, they burst out into the relative safety of the hallway. They didn't stop running until they reached the front doors, the heavy wooden barriers between them and the whispering voices in the basement. Outside, in the soft glow of the streetlights, they finally allowed themselves to breathe. The nightmarish scene from the basement swam before their eyes. They had seen the classroom, heard the whispers, felt the oppressive dread that seemed to ooze from the very walls. They knew they would never forget that night. This is a true story. I believe my friend because she wouldn't lie to me, and I know that what we experienced that night changed us. We are no longer the same people we were before we discovered the secrets of room 212. When I booked the room, the old innkeeper warned me, "Don't stay in room 9. Don't stay in room 9. His weathered face was creased with concern, but I was young and invincible. Or maybe I just didn't care. I laughed it off and went to my room. It was circular and every wall was covered in mirrors. There must have been dozens, maybe hundreds of them, all reflecting different angles of the same worn carpet, the same four-poster bed, the same heavy wooden desk. The only way out was through the one door, which was locked from the inside. I tried the handle, rattled it a few times, then shrugged and got into bed. I should have listened to the old man. I should have run when I had the chance. Now, fear coiled in my stomach and spread ice-cold fingers across my skin. I pulled the covers over my head and squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself not to think about the hundreds of eyes staring back at me from the mirrors, watching me. I tried to sleep, but after a while, my curiosity got the better of me. I sat up in bed and slowly removed the covers. Then I started blinking, moving slowly, methodically, like a scientist performing an experiment. My reflection blinked back, its movements exactly matching mine. Encouraged, I reached out a hand and waved it slowly from side to side. My reflection waved back, grinning. I frowned, then smiled as wide as I could, showing as many teeth as I could. The reflection did the same. Then I did something crazy. I got out of bed, walked over to the mirror, and stared directly at my reflection. It stared back, unblinking. I stared harder, trying to intimidate it, to scare it, but it didn't budge. And that's when I noticed the difference between us. My eyelids were closed, but my reflection's eyes were open, staring back at me with soulless black pits. I slammed my hand against the mirror, my scream echoing around the room as my reflection mimicked me, its hand slamming against the glass. I stumbled back, tripping over the rug, scraping my palm on the hard floor. I looked down, wincing at the long, thin cut across my skin. Then I looked back at the mirror, my breath catching in my throat. The reflection's hand was whole, no mark or scar of any kind. In a panic, I backed away, falling against the bed. I scrambled onto the sheets, pulling the covers over my head. But there was nowhere to hide, no place to be safe. The walls were watching me, their hundreds of eyes boring into me. Then I heard a noise, a slow, deliberate step followed by another and another. Someone was walking in my direction, whoever it was. Their footsteps were heavy, dragging, like they were in great pain. I peeked out from under the covers, my heart hammering against my ribs. At first, I couldn't see anything in the dim oil lamplight. Then I saw a shape emerge from the gloom, a hunched figure dragging itself closer and closer. I screamed and buried my face in the pillow. I could feel the weight of the creature's stare boring into me, could hear the wet, gurgling sounds it made as it approached. "Please, please go away," I whispered, my voice shaking. But the creature kept coming, its shadow growing larger and larger on the wall until finally it loomed over me, its face inches from mine. And I saw that it was nothing but bone, a desiccated old man with skin like parchment stretched over his skull. His eyes, sunken and black, stared into my soul. He opened his mouth to speak, but all that came out was a raspy whisper. "Don't trust the mirrors," he croaked, his voice like dead leaves crunching underfoot. "They'll trap you forever." Then he was gone, melting back into the shadows, leaving me alone in the darkness with the mirrors. I stayed in that bed for hours, maybe days, too afraid to move, too afraid to look away. Then slowly, ever so slowly, I got up, walked over to the mirror and stared at my reflection. It stared back, its eyes empty sockets filled with an eternal darkness. I reached out a hand and touched the cold, smooth surface as if I could reach through and grab my own soul. When I pulled my hand back, it wasn't me I saw, but the old man from before, his skin stretched tight over his bones. I screamed and fell to my knees, my reflection grinning down at me, the corners of its mouth splitting open, revealing rows and rows of needle-sharp teeth. This isn't my first strange story involving a phone. A few years ago, I got an iPhone 6 Plus. At first, it was great. It had all the features I wanted and a bigger screen than my old phone. Then I started getting calls from people I didn't know. I ignored them until one day in art class, the phone was sketching. The person next to me said, "Who's calling you? It says anonymous." I looked at the screen and it did say anonymous. But the name wasn't grayed out like it usually is when you get a call from someone who isn't in your contacts. I picked up and asked, "Hello?" Click. Then the person on the other end hung up. I called back, but it went straight to voicemail. I didn't think much of it until it happened again. This time I was in the middle of an exam. I slipped out of the room, picked up the phone, and asked, "Hello?" Voice on the other end. "Hi. Is this thing on?" I could hear what sounded like keyboard clicks. Then the voice said, "Wait, it is on. Okay, can you hear me?" "Yeah, I can hear you. Who are you?" "Do you not recognize this number?" "No, I don't." The person on the other end sighed very loudly. "It's me." Then they hung up. I immediately called back. It went to voicemail. I left a message, but I wasn't expecting a reply. I just needed to hear a real voice on the other end instead of that weird robotic one. An hour later, I heard my phone ring. I picked up, and the person on the other end began speaking in a language I didn't recognize. I hung up and blocked the number. But then, the calls kept coming. They never stopped. Even when I turned off my phone, it would still ring. And every time I picked up, there was only silence on the other end. I ended up throwing the phone into a drawer where it stayed for months. One day I decided to sell it because I couldn't take the mystery anymore. I listed it online and waited for it to sell. Then one morning I woke up to a message from the person who bought it. He told me that the phone had stopped working. I should have known right then that getting rid of the phone wasn't going to solve anything, because whatever it was that was haunting me through that phone wasn't going away. A few weeks later, I was at a thrift store when I saw a box of old phones. Most of them were broken, but there was one iPhone 6 Plus that looked almost new. I asked how much it was, and the cashier said it was $20. So I bought it and took it home. When I got there, I put the SIM card from my old phone into the new one and switched it on. Everything worked. The screen was perfect. The camera quality was good. It even had a charger and a case. It was as if the phone was meant to be mine. But then the messages started coming in. They were all from the same unknown number. I ignored them until one night I was awoken by the sound of my phone ringing. I sat up in bed and reached for the phone on my nightstand. It was the same number. As before, I hesitated for a moment, then picked up. Voice on the other end. "I see you." I slammed the phone down and turned away, trying to go back to sleep, but then the phone rang again. Still, I ignored it until I heard the voice say my name. I spun around and stared at the phone in disbelief. Voice, "I see you. I see you watching me." I threw the phone across the room. It landed on the desk, then it rang again. I got out of bed and walked over to the desk. On the screen, it said my own number. I looked around the room, but there was no one else there. I picked up the phone and asked, "What do you want?" Silence. Then the voice whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." I threw the phone back onto the desk, then backed away. Suddenly, the desk began shaking violently. I screamed and jumped back. The phone flew off the desk and onto the floor. I stared at it in fear as it began to move. It slid toward me and I cried out, but as it got closer, I noticed that the phone wasn't moving on its own. Someone was pushing it. I backed away, tripping over my own feet. Then I saw a pair of legs in front of me, tall, thin legs ending in black, pointy shoes. I looked up and saw the face of a woman wearing a long black coat. She smiled and beckoned with her finger. "Come play with me," she said. I screamed and ran for the door. I could hear her voice echoing behind me. "Come play with me." I burst through the door and sprinted down the hallway. I didn't stop running until I reached my room. Then I locked the door and slid down to the floor, my back pressed against it. I could still hear the woman's voice, but now it was coming from inside my closet. The closet door began to shake. I stared at it, paralyzed with fear. Then the doorknob began to turn. I missed my stop. To be fair, it was the first time I'd ever traveled here alone, and the train journey had taken so long that I'd dozed off. When I woke up, the train had already pulled into the station. I looked around. It was unlike any station I'd ever seen before. It was old, crumbling, and completely deserted. There were no other passengers on the platform, and there was no staff anywhere to be seen. I waited a few minutes, but when the train didn't depart, I decided to get off and find somewhere else to wait for the next train. As I stepped onto the cracked pavement, a sudden wave of dizziness hit me. I swayed on my feet and pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. What the hell was this place? Why did it feel so wrong? I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to the usual mix of exhaustion and travel anxiety. I started walking along the platform, past the rows of deserted benches and the overgrown weeds that were beginning to spill onto the tracks. At the end of the platform, I found a shelter with a timetable on the wall. It said the next train wouldn't be for another 40 minutes, so I sat down on one of the benches to wait. And that's when I heard it, the sound of a train pulling into the station. I turned to see an old, battered train lumbering to a stop. It wasn't on the timetable. I watched as the train doors slid open and began to creep forward. A chill wind rushed out, carrying with it the smell of rust and decay. And then I saw them, shadowy figures tumbling out of the train, dragging themselves onto the platform. They were pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that stared straight ahead. They shuffled past me without a word, without even a glance, and disappeared into the darkness beyond the station. I should have left then, run away from that station as fast as I could, but some unseen pressure was pinning me to the bench. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I could do was watch as the last of the passengers stumbled off the train and the doors hissed shut. The train began to move again, inching forward toward me. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. The train lurched to a halt, and the doors slid open once more. But this time, they weren't empty. I could see movement inside, dark shapes shifting in the dim light. And as the train swayed, I saw them more clearly, faces pressed against the windows, eyes staring directly at me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if the very air around the train was thick with an unseen force, holding me captive on the bench. The train doors slid open wider, revealing a black abyss inside. A voice boomed over the intercom. "Last chance, get aboard now." That was my cue, my only chance to escape this nightmare. But when I tried to move, my legs refused to obey. My whole body felt heavy, like a weight was pressing down on me, anchoring me to the bench. The voice boomed again, this time closer, more insistent. "Get aboard now or you'll never leave this station alive." I finally managed to tear my eyes away from the train. I scrambled back, knocking over the bench in my haste to get away, but no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't outrun the train. It lurched forward, crashing through the barriers at the end of the platform. And in a flash, it was upon me. I tripped, falling onto the tracks just as the train's shadow swallowed me whole. I braced for impact, but it never came. I looked up to see the train looming over me, its windows mere inches away. But instead of finding me, the train seemed to go right through me, its wheels crashing over my bones, its metal body tearing me apart. And then it was gone, vanishing into the darkness, leaving me lying on the tracks in a pool of my own blood. The intercom crackled to life. "Welcome aboard. The train to nowhere awaits." And then, "Welcome to the afterlife." Welcome to my channel. This is a true scary story from a nurse. Every building has its own sounds. Our hospital was old and creaky. Most of the time I didn't pay much attention to the sounds. There was one sound that drove me crazy though, and that was the sound of knocking. It would come from the abandoned psych ward on the top floor. We never used that ward anymore. It had been locked up for years. Every door was sealed shut with those big metal bars. You couldn't open them from the inside or out. On the night shift, I would sometimes hear tapping coming from inside the locked ward. At first, I thought it was just some pipes or something. I tried not to think about it too much. One night, I was getting stuff from the supply closet on the same floor as the psych ward. That supply closet was right next to the nurse's station on the ward. As I got closer to the closet, I heard the tapping again. I stopped and listened. It definitely sounded like someone was knocking on the door. I thought, maybe it's the wind. But the windows on that ward had been boarded up long ago. There was no way that any wind could get in there and tap on the door. I grabbed the supplies and ran back down the hall to the elevator. Once I was in the elevator, I looked up and down the hall. All the doors were closed. I pressed the button for the first floor and stepped inside. The elevator was old, and it made a loud groaning sound as it descended. That groaning sound turned into a screeching sound. Then the lights went out. I was trapped in an old elevator with no power going to the psych ward. When the elevator finally lurched to a halt, I stepped out and ran to the bathroom to splash water on my face. I needed to calm down. I started to make myself feel better by telling myself that the knocking was just some kids playing a prank. But then I heard a voice. It said, "Hey, hey, hey, nurse." I froze. I knew that voice. It was the same voice that had been knocking. I spun around. No one was there. Then I heard the voice again. Hey, 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 nurse, come play with us. I turned and walked toward the stairwell. I had to get away from there. As I walked, the voice followed me. It seemed to be coming from all around me. It was whispering in my ear. Come play with us, nurse. Come play with us. I kept walking until I reached the stairwell. As I started down the stairs, I noticed the fluorescence light at the top of the stairs flickered on and off. I hesitated, then continued going down the stairs. I had almost made it to the first floor when the voice said, "You can't hide, nurse." The light flickered again. I looked up. In that instant, I saw the entire ward. The doors were all open now, and it was filled with people wearing old-fashioned gowns. They were staring directly at me. Then the lights went out again. When they came back on, the doors were closed and the hall was empty. It was silent. I made it all the way downstairs without hearing another sound. I don't know what was in that room, but whatever it was, it wanted me to come back. I never told anyone about that. I was too afraid. I worked there for another 6 months before I quit. Whenever I would go past that supply closet, I would feel a cold spot. Sometimes I would even hear voices. I never went back to check, though. One day I found a box of old files in the supply closet. The box was labeled staff, so I opened it. There were personnel files from the hospital's employees who worked on that ward back in the 1970s. I pulled out the box and was about to put the files back when I saw one file that wasn't like the others. It was brand new. No one had ever looked at this file before. I knew I shouldn't, but I opened it anyway. It was my file. It had my name, my address, my phone number, and even my social security number. And right above my picture it said, "Admit date, 10/26/1973. I slammed the file shut and put it back in the box. I don't want to know what happened to those patients, and I certainly hope that none of them are still there. Because if any of them got out, I'm pretty sure that they would want to play with me. Thanks for watching. If you like this story, please hit the like button. And if you want to hear more scary stories from me, follow my channel. Stories are meant to be shared. That's why we're so thrilled to have our very own app now available on iOS and Android. In addition to hearing all your favorite stories, you can now listen to podcasts like the No Sleep Podcast, which brings you terrifying tales from around the world, some of them sent in by you, the listeners, and some written by the incredible team of writers. You can also listen to original podcasts like the Magnus Archives, which follows the employees of the Magnus Institute as they investigate supernatural occurrences in modern-day London. Or maybe you'd prefer a thrilling mystery like The White Vault, an official Rick and Morty podcast where you get to play the game. And don't worry, if you're more of a Team C's fan, we've got you covered with official podcasts based on those stories too. All your favorite podcasts are now in one place. So go download the app and give it a try today. New episodes premiere every Tuesday. And now, without further ado, here's this week's story. I grew up at my parents' boarding house. It was an old building with peeling paint and leaking pipes, but it was home. Most of the rooms had numbers, but there was one in between rooms 5 and 7 that didn't. I never thought much of it until I was about 12 years old. One night I was awoken in my room to what sounded like screams in the middle of the night. Obviously I was scared. Being the dutiful daughter that I was, I got out of bed to go check on my parents' room, only to find that the door to the unmarked room was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open and stepping inside. Inside, I found a perfectly ordinary bedroom. There was a bed in the corner with a faded floral bedspread, a dresser with a chipped mirror, a desk with a single drawer, and a window with a heavy drape. But the most peculiar thing about the room was that the bed was warm, as if someone had just been sleeping there. I remember shoving my fingers into the blankets, half expecting to feel a body beneath. When I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. The door. I knew for a fact that the door had been closed when I entered the room, but now it was wide open. I could have sworn that I would have noticed if the door had been open when I went in, but maybe I had just blocked it out. I shrugged it off and went back to my room. From then on, I made it my mission to find out who was sleeping in the room. Every night I would sneak out of my room and check the bed to see if it was warm. For the first few nights, the bed was indeed warm, but no one was ever there. I began leaving notes on the bed asking who was in the room and why, but I never got a response. One night I decided to sit in the room to pass the time. I brought a book with me, but I soon found myself too scared to read. I ended up sitting in the corner staring at the bed for hours until I heard my mom calling me. I explained to her that I was just trying to figure out who was sleeping in the room, but she just sighed and told me to stop being ridiculous. She said that there was no one in the room and that I should just forget about it. But I couldn't. I was determined to find out the truth. Every night I continued to check the room. Then something strange happened. After a couple weeks, the bed started to feel cold. I was confused since no one had been sleeping in the room. Yet it had felt warm every night before. I kept checking just in case, but the bed stayed cold. I became convinced that whatever or whoever was sleeping in the room had finally stopped coming. Then, on the 7th night, I woke up to the sound of scratching at the door. I hesitated for a moment, fear gripping my heart, before slowly opening the door. As the room came into view, I gasped. The walls were covered in writing. It looked like someone had scribbled on them in the dark. I walked over to get a closer look. The message was clear. Your turn. So when I was younger, there was this lake near my hometown that was supposedly haunted. And every time someone would go swimming in it, they would come back with some crazy story about how the lake repeated everything you said back to you in an eerie whisper. Like if you went up to the lake and were like, "Hey, how are you doing?" The lake would be like, "How are you doing?" in a whisper, obviously, seconds later, which was really creepy. And so one day I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go test this out. So I went down to the lake and I started talking to it, and it did exactly what they said it would do. It repeated everything I said back to me in this creepy whisper. But after a while I got bored of it, so I decided to call out my name. I was like, "Hey, what's your name?" And then I waited for the reply. And when I heard it, I nearly pissed myself. Because instead of saying my name, it said, "Help me, I'm drowning." I was taken aback. I was like, did I just imagine that? But then I heard it again. "Help me, I'm drowning." This time a little louder. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's not normal. And that's when I saw it. Something floating in the water. I couldn't quite make out what it was at first, because it was pretty far away from shore, and this lake was huge. It took up like half of the town's entire property. I mean, we didn't have a whole lot of space where we lived, so when something was out in the middle of the lake, you could barely see it. But as it got closer, I realized it was a person. I think I actually screamed when I saw it, because the person in the water was me. Well, it was my face. I don't remember if I blacked out or what happened, but I remember seeing this girl in the water with my face. She had long dark hair, pale skin, and she was wearing the same clothes I had on, except hers were soaked and getting darker by the second. And as she got closer, I could see that her face was white as snow. She looked at me with these big round eyes, and I could see the panic in them. They were pleading for help. I don't even remember if she said anything. I think she tried to, but all that came out was water. And that's when I felt it. This horrible feeling inside of me, like dread, like something terrible had just happened. I don't remember much after that. I think someone called 911 because the next thing I remember is paramedics trying to revive me on the grass by the lake. They were shouting, "Come on, come on!" But I couldn't respond. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't move. I don't even remember if I was conscious at that point. But they must have revived me because I ended up at the hospital. When I told the doctor what had happened, he just shook his head and gave me a pill. I threw up all over the place and then I fell asleep. When I woke up, I was back at home in my bed. My mom was there and she was crying. I don't remember much after that. I feel like I blocked it out. All I remember is feeling really tired, like there was this heavy weight on my chest keeping me down. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to go anywhere. I spent weeks in my room just thinking about what had happened. Was I going insane? Had I just seen a ghost? What was going on? Then one day, I don't remember if it was a week or a month later, I was looking through my messages on my phone and I found one from one of my friends. And it said, "Hey, did you go to the lake today? You left really early this morning. I got worried and came to check on you." And that was when I realized I had been missing. No wonder no one had been able to find me. I had blocked it out. I didn't remember any of it happening. After that, I went to the lake with my mom and some of my friends, and we searched for anything, like maybe a body or something. But we couldn't find anything. There wasn't anything there, and the police never found anything either. I was never supposed to go into that lake, by the way. They closed it off to swimmers for a while after that. But now it's open again and people swim in it all the time. And I haven't been back since. Yeah. That was terrifying. Do you know what I'm talking about? Of course you do. We all have those moments in our lives where we step into an old elevator, one that groans ominously with every creak of its machinery as it ascends or descends, carrying us silently towards our destination. But sometimes the ride doesn't end where it should. Sometimes the doors open and reveal something they shouldn't. Hey everybody, welcome to my channel, where we tell scary stories. Tonight, I will be reading from a collection of frightening tales by talented writers. All the stories I'll be sharing are original, uncensored, and 100% terrifying. If that sounds like your kind of horror, then stick around. The first story is called The Hotel Elevator That Never Stops by Nathan J. Moore. The elevator was old, groaning with each floor. It was late, and I was alone in the hotel. I rode it down past the basement, my destination, and kept going. The car lurched to a halt between floors. The fluorescent lights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I punched the button for the basement again. The light flickered back on and the doors slid open. I stepped out onto a floor that shouldn't exist. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, the walls scratched with what looked like claw marks. A shiver ran down my spine. I could hear whispers behind each door, faint voices that seemed to call my name. Fear tightened its grip around my heart, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I had to get out of there. But the only way out was through the doors at the end of the hall. I started toward them, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. As I approached, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. When I reached out to open the door, a blood-curdling scream tore through the silence. I recoiled as if struck, my heart hammering against my ribs. What was in there? What had made that sound? I hesitated, fear warring with curiosity. Then, driven by a sudden surge of adrenaline, I flung the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty. I spun around, my eyes darting about, searching for the source of the scream. There was nothing. I raced back to the elevator, slamming the doors shut and hitting the button for the lobby. The elevator lurched upward, its silence even more unnerving than its previous groans. When the doors opened, I stumbled out into the hotel lobby, my legs shaky. I glanced at the clock on the wall, surprised to see how late it was. I was soaked in sweat, my clothes clinging to me uncomfortably. I needed to get out of there. I pushed open the glass doors and stepped outside, gasping at the sight before me. A thick fog had descended upon the courtyard, shrouding everything in an eerie mist. The wind picked up, swirling the fog around my feet. The rain started again, cold and relentless. I hurried away from the hotel, its dark windows watching me go. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, lurking just beyond my sight. I quickened my pace, my senses on high alert. The hotel loomed behind me, a silent, dark presence. And as I glanced back, I saw the doors open and close, the doors open and close, the doors open and close. That was terrifying. I hope you enjoyed that story. If you did, please consider subscribing. Also, feel free to join my group where I share not safe for work stories. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. A chill went down my spine. Who was that? Was it my imagination? I tried to shake off the unease, but as the days passed, the stranger in the mirror kept appearing. Sometimes he'd be lying in bed with me, his face inches from mine, his eyes gleaming with an eerie light. Other times he'd stand behind me while I was getting dressed, his cold fingers trailing down my neck. But when I turned around, he was never there. I started avoiding mirrors, but the stranger seemed to be everywhere. He'd lean against a wall, watching me with an unnerving smile. He'd sit across from me at the dinner table, his eyes boring into mine. And in the rare moments when I caught him off guard, I'd see a flash of something sinister in his eyes, a fleeting glimpse of what I knew was evil. My friends and family tried to help. They'd come over, bring me food, and stay with me through the night, just to reassure themselves that everything was all right. Yet even they were unsettled by the constant feeling of dread that permeated the house. No one could explain it, not even the priest who came to bless the home. As the weeks dragged on, the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Sleep became a distant memory as I spent my nights sitting in the darkness, desperately trying to piece together the fragmented memories of my past. The only thing that gave me solace was a small wooden box that had been passed down to me by my grandmother. Inside lay a single key, tarnished with age. I didn't know what it unlocked, but I clung to it as if it were a lifeline. Then one night, as I was rummaging through the attic, searching for anything that might provide clues about my identity, I found it. Hidden beneath a pile of dusty boxes was a door, almost camouflaged so well that I'd lived in this house for years without ever seeing it. The tarnished key fit perfectly into the keyhole, and as I turned it, the heavy door creaked open, revealing a spiral staircase that disappeared into the gloom. Curiosity and fear warred within me, but the voice echoed in my mind, urging me forward. With each step I descended, the air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a room that was both familiar and strange. It was my living room, yet it was filled with furniture that I didn't recognize. And looming in the center of it all was a full-length mirror. As I approached it, my reflection smiled at me, or rather the stranger in my reflection smiled. He looked different somehow, more solid, as if he were standing in a different realm, closer to this one, closer to me. The air crackled with energy. His lips parted as if he were about to speak, but before he could utter a sound, the room started to collapse in on itself. The walls buckled, the ceiling caved in, and I felt myself falling into a bottomless abyss. When I woke up, it was in this room. My head pounded and my throat was dry. As I sat up, I noticed the wooden box from my dreams on the floor. I opened it, but the key was gone. Then I saw it, a tiny sliver of light escaping from beneath the loose floorboard. I pried it up and a musty smell wafted out. Beneath it, hidden in the dark recesses of the floor, was another keyhole. I inserted the key and turned it. It felt like I was unlocking a part of myself that had been buried for a long time. And then, the floor gave way. I tumbled down a secret passageway, landing in a dark, dank basement. Cobwebs brushed against my skin and the air hung heavy with the scent of decay. In the flickering light of the basement window, I saw rows upon rows of books, each one bound in human skin. And at the far end of the shelf, I saw a journal with my name on it. As I turned the brittle pages, memories flooded back. I learned of a dark legacy, of experiments conducted on unsuspecting victims, and I realized with a growing sense of horror that I was the next target. But there was another. Hidden within the journal's pages was a map leading to a hidden vault beneath the house where a powerful artifact lay dormant, waiting to be unleashed. This is where the stranger came from, I realized. This is why he's here. The question is, what am I going to do about it?